6, 5, 4, 3. Hey, Jake, you're on mute. Just a heads up.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Starboard Portal. I'm Jake Fish, and I'll be your moderator for today's guest, Rain Bennett. And before I introduce Rain, I just want to remind you that if you enjoyed today's session or any of the other sessions, please support our efforts to build a community of active and engaged sailors through the Starboard Portal by purchasing or renewing a U.S. Sailing membership. We have a lot of great content coming up on the schedule, and thanks to U.S. Sailing members, we're able to adapt and evolve to better serve sailors with content like this. Visit us at mem.ussailing.org. That's mem.ussailing.org to join or renew your U.S. Sailing membership today. Today, we welcome Rain Bennett to the Starboard Portal. Rain is a 2-time Emmy-nominated filmmaker, writer, and competitive storyteller with over a decade of experience producing documentary films. With his company, 6 Second Stories, he helps businesses use short-form video storytelling in their marketing strategies to inspire action and maximize impact in minimal time. Today's presentation is titled, Using Storytelling to Strengthen Your Community During the Coronavirus Crisis. Please, folks, ask your questions in the YouTube chat feature throughout this session. Again, ask your questions in the YouTube chat feature, and we'll relay those to Rain throughout his presentation. Rain, it's great to have you on. Welcome to the Starboard Portal.
Thanks so much, Jake. I'm excited to be here, happy to be here.
To talk a little bit about, some of the first, as you were thinking about this presentation coming in here today and something you've delivered before, perhaps even customized on some level to fit the coronavirus situation. Talk a little bit about your development of that story.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who aren't familiar with me, hopefully many of you are, I was one of the keynote speakers at the Sailing Leadership Forum back in February, before the world flipped upside down, as it were. And that was my last keynote speech before all events were canceled. And so no speeches or presentations coming up anytime soon. Fortunately, I'm a filmmaker, so I did have editing work lined up, but there are no productions happening, certainly no events. So a lot of my friends that are full-time speakers are really, really taking a hit to their lives and livelihood. Obviously, that's not the only industry. So many people that I know are really negatively affected by this when it comes to their income and their jobs and what they do and how they serve the people that they serve. Specifically, people with non-essential jobs, people who have jobs that are where people congregate. I just started noticing, I didn't have to be super observant to notice that people were hurting, right? Like we all are in some capacity, whether we lost all our income and our businesses are shut down, or just being in this heavy moment. And I'll be honest with you, I'll be very open and vulnerable right now. I'm a content creator, and as I already said, I help people through speaking and leading workshops. Well, when this all hit, and it was heavy, for lack of a better word, it was heavy. I had this moment where I was like, I don't really know how to move forward. Like, I see people out there that are putting out content that seem to be a little bit tone deaf. Let's say they have an automated ad sequence out and they're just going on about businesses as usual, as if the world isn't upside down. And we don't have major things happening to us that have shifted our priorities. And I knew that didn't feel right to me. And I'm not trying to knock anybody's hustle, because we're all trying to keep the lights on, so to speak, while we're here. So I'm not saying we shouldn't work and do what we do, but I was curious, like, how do I go about this? Do I continue just putting out my content as if nothing happens? Do I make all content coronavirus related? Because that's getting a little saturated too. And as I was working through this, I realized it's like, what do you do? What does storytelling do? What's your whole thesis about this? It's about connecting people. as a group, sharing stories is how we create bonds and how we do things and more deeply impact the world together. So this light bulb went off and I was like, Rain, this is like more than ever, this is when this type of content is needed for us to understand how sharing stories continues to strengthen our relationships and deepen our bonds with the communities and our audiences. I was speaking to, I told Jake earlier, I'm a moderator. One of my clients is a cancer foundation, and one of the virtual speaking jobs I've picked up lately is being a moderator for Facebook Lives, where we host a doctor, a different specialist on this rare cancer. And we did one just this week. And I love this thing she said. She said, and she took it from someone else, but the quote was, we keep calling this social distancing. And she didn't like that. And I don't either. She said, let's call it physical distancing with social solidarity. And what I love so much about that is, like, when we're in these dark times, like, this is the point where we need social connection more than ever. And you don't have to look any further than the platform we're on today and what we're trying to accomplish today. I know we've all been on a lot of like Zoom webinars and conversations, but that's because human connection is so vital. So when I started thinking about how storytelling can help us in this time of a pandemic, of a crisis like this, I started talking to friends of mine and other storytelling experts that are in the field, and I landed on 3 different ways. And that's what I want to talk about today, and what I want to encourage us to create a conversation about. So as Jake said in the beginning, and I want to reiterate that, to me, I want this to be an interactive thing. I can talk about stories for hours. I lead 8-hour workshops. Like, this is what I do. So I can certainly do that, but I don't want it to be a lecture, right? That defeats the point and the purpose of us coming together as a community to learn how we can share stories to help our situations and help our community members in their situations as well. So I encourage you to ask any questions that come up about these topics. What are you experiencing? What are you going through? The conversation isn't just between you and I either. It's between all of the members here talking amongst each other and sharing ways that they've pivoted or things that they've done during this time. So I just want to say, ask your questions. I really want this to serve you and not just be a one-way street of information. That being said, don't feel forced, but if a question comes up, do not hesitate to ask, because I'm here to serve you and I want to help you all learn how to, if we can't grow, to continue to sustain our strong bonds that we have in the communities that we've established. And so Jake is going to let me know when those questions come in, but I want to talk at least a little bit in the beginning about these concepts and these 3 ways that I see very clearly that storytelling can help us strengthen our communities during this time. And I'm just going to go ahead and list them off, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper. 1, as we've already alluded to, storytelling creates connection. Okay. Storytelling has been the way we've, as humans, have created bonds with one another since time immemorial, since the cognitive revolution. And we were able to, when we learned language, okay, stories is the way we've always connected as humans. So boom, 1, storytelling creates connection. 2, storytelling shows us the way forward. It gives us a roadmap. This one we're going to spend some time on, because this is really important right now when all of us to some extent feel lost. We don't know what the future holds. Yes, some places are starting to open back up, but we don't know what's going to happen after that. Are we going to have another peak? We don't know how long this is going to last, how long it's going to be before we can start gathering in large groups again. Back to the client that I have, the Cancer Foundation, and I've hosted a different doctor talking about COVID-19 for the past 5 weeks. Let me tell you something. No one really knows. This is all new to them. Everything that they're telling us, there are best practices that we should follow to be safe, but it's all like every day they learn newer and newer information. So even the top people on this, which is not me, it's way above my level, aren't sure what's going to happen. So of course, I and most of us don't know what's going to happen. And so sharing stories as we learn is going to be crucial for us to find our way forward. And that's going to be crucial for us to get back to a normal life to some extent. And then 3rd, stories give us hope. It's very simple. The good stories that we all love, we know what happens. You know what happens before you even get into them, right? You know who's going to come away the winner. And there's a reason why, even when we know the outcome, we know the quote unquote good guys going to win, there's a reason we're still drawn to them, like like a moth to a flame, right? We're still so intrinsically attracted to stories and storytelling. That's because we love that feeling of overcoming an obstacle. Okay, it gives us hope that we can too. So those three ways, storytelling gives us hope, it shows us the way or a roadmap, and it keeps us connected and grows our bonds. Those are the three ways that I see that storytelling is really going to help us during this time. Jake, how are we feeling? Do we have anything coming in yet?
Just one question from me
Sure.
in that you addressed some of this on some level, but one of my first questions really was, staying positive, but not being tone deaf was my first question for you. And you sort of outlined a lot of that, but that's a sticky situation, and it's not clear. It's a bit gray because to some people it's not tone deaf, and to some people it is. And so one thought would be to, if you're in a position of storytelling, how do you work through some of those delicate areas of
Yeah.
this is a great story, but geez, I'm seeing a picture there that might not be in line with either social distancing or, to your point, physical distancing. Just thoughts on like how you might be able to manage that if you're in a position of storytelling.
Yeah, it's it's a tightrope walk and a balancing act all at the same time. And there's no one right answer because all of our jobs and all of our services, they're all unique, right? Everything that we do and all people are unique. So my advice for that situation is, one, share all stories. We're not just, you know, uh, painting this colorful, beautiful picture, hopeful picture, right? Some of the stories we need to share are darker ones, are quote unquote bad ones, and some are good. Sharing stories in general is going to be helpful, but there are nuances to each of our situations. So to your point, Jake, I think that what I would suggest as being our guiding light, because I have this question internally every day. If your guiding light and your guiding principle is who you serve, right, and not so much yourself, but who you serve and how you serve them, and if that's who your content is directed towards, then I think that you're in the clear. Okay. What we're going to talk about a little bit today in the second part, when we're talking about how storytelling can help us find a way or show us a way forward, there's a lot of examples going on now of how people have creatively pivoted what they do and have been able to sustain or survive and even thrive. Some of them have changed their business models now, moving on. And that's something I want to talk about because I feel like a lot of people aren't sure what to do and how to change. And that takes us getting back to the essence of what you really do, not the form that it takes and the vehicle that you use to do what you do, but what you really do. And those that were at the keynote speech back in February in San Diego know that I talk a lot about storytelling is about what's going on the surface and then what's really going on internally. And we'll talk a little bit about that more. So how you navigate that when you're sharing these stories, and it is a delicate time, is be vulnerable, be authentic, be real, but keep your eyes and your focus on who you serve and speak to them through your heart and wholeheartedly trying to live out your purpose and what you're trying to achieve. So if I'm focused on who I'm serving, and when I had this debate in my head, I was thinking about people like you all. Like, I asked myself, and that was my own ego saying like, am I going to, just put out content? Will I feel icky about that? But then when I flipped it and I thought about my audience and the people who I try to help, and I realized like, no, I actually have something of value to them that could help them in their dark time. It was a no brainer. Like there was no question that I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to do and keep doing what I do, but not be tone deaf and not understand that, hey, some people, some people are really struggling during this point. And I think that we can't, move past that. And we have to be conscious of the heaviness of the situation. And hey, sometimes we're just going to need to like take some time or sit in the heaviness. I am by no means encouraging us to act like nothing's wrong and just tell these wonderful, sweet, hopeful stories. Like keep it real, but think about who you aim to serve, focus on them, and tell the stories that are going to continue to affect them in the ways that you want to.
Interesting question here from Margaret Palmert. Really thought this was interesting because we see this, I see it, I know other people in this business are also passing this through their own filter too. But for nonprofit community sailing programs that really rely on funds from the sailing community and their participation and membership and donations, for those nonprofit community sailing programs trying to do fundraising right now, which they need to do. And how do we tell that story? How do they tell that story in a way that doesn't seem tone deaf here in the current situation? Because look, a lot of people are in this boat, whether they're a lot of nonprofit organizations, whether it's sailing or other sports or other entities are in a tight spot right now, and they need to keep their businesses alive and need to try to raise money and grow their funds and stay afloat, if you will.
Yeah.
Thoughts there on how to manage and balance that element of not perhaps turning your audience, against you during this somewhat sensitive time.
Yes, I have several thoughts on that. A couple that I'll share right now that I hope can be easily applied. So first of all, raising money right now is difficult because you and everyone else that wasn't a nonprofit or isn't a nonprofit is trying to raise money. I know, not random, but just individuals, friends of mine that are freelancers is what I meant to say, that are having GoFundMe's for just to keep their lights on, right? All businesses are doing this now, and especially nonprofits who always have to do this. So it's a tough time, and I recognize that because everybody is looking for help right now. And I think GoFundMe itself, I don't even know how many percent of increase they had for campaigns, but it was astronomical. There's so many more campaigns going on out there. So it's highly competitive because everybody, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but everybody has their hand out. Everybody is asking right now for help. Okay, so this gives us an opportunity, right? You have to creatively think about, what can I offer during this time? Yes, I'm asking for money and we still need help, but you have to continue, as I just said, to think about the people that you serve and who you can help and who else you may be able to help in this time. So instead of it being about me or us and we want to keep our employees on, like, everybody can identify with that, but everybody's going through that. So instead of making it you centric, make it them centric, the people who you serve, and try to help them as much as you can during this time. You got to be a little creative about that. So, for example, I helped a friend who was a custom upholsterer, and they lost 80% of their business. This was their slow season anyway, but nobody's getting custom upholstery on their couches right now, right? And so the owner, one of the owners, her sister is a nurse and needed personal protective equipment, like a mask, for her personal life, right? She had it at her hospital, but they were running out of supply. We all know that problem. And so she needed some just to go to the grocery store. So she asked her sister, hey, do you think you could do it? And the upholsterer said, sure. When she gave it to her sister, all the other nurses were like, we want some too. So long story short, the upholsterer now is creating up to thousands of masks and caps and gowns for Vidant Health in Eastern North Carolina. And I was like, my friend was doing this, and I was like, I have to help them because they didn't really know what they were doing. So I established a GoFundMe for them and helped them kind of create a campaign to get money in. Now, what they were doing, that's a perfect example of, like, they're not asking for money to keep their business alive, right? They're asking for money so that they can do something that's really helping people. Like anybody, so many people got behind that. We raised $6,000 for them to keep doing that because they were using their service, upholstery, to create things that were desperately in need right now. Now, how did they benefit from that? Because they were just paying for costs. They weren't taking money for this, but they've been featured in so many different newspaper articles and so many different on television news. They are their star, not their star, but like their status and the people who know about them is elevated because they've been doing this. So they will inevitably, when things flip back around, will get more business because of it, because they've put their mission and their purpose out there and things that are bigger than themselves. Okay. So that's that particular example. So my point is to think about it creatively. How can we focus what we do, the service we provide, what it's really about, to people who are in need, and put the focus on that instead of just, hey, we're struggling right now, because that's going to be really hard to filter through everybody who's struggling right now. And then secondly, and we're going to address this right now, is to use story structure to do it. Okay, here's where people are missing out when I see people on Facebook or wherever posting a GoFundMe link and saying, hey, times are tough right now. I'm a massage therapist and I've lost all my clients. You know, it's hard to ask for help, but anything, you know, would help right now. I empathize with her, right? But that's like when I'm like, where do I give? I do have some money. I want to help out. Where do I help out where it helps the most? That one doesn't win when I see like, oh, there's someone using their skills to create protective personal equipment for nurses, right? But why that was so effective, because they were getting a few donations beforehand, because she just put it out there like, hey, we're doing this, help if you can, here's my PayPal. There was no like direct call to action. What helped her do that was I literally wrote the story in the GoFundMe description and created a video and told the story of what happened, because I thought it was great. You have the girl who's providing masks for her sister. That's what it comes down to. She's this is her family she's trying to take care of, who is a healthcare hero, right? But then what she's actually doing is creating all these, these different masks. And so when I told that story and laid it out in the correct structure of a good story, that's what had people latch on and motivated them to take action. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. Is stories, if you tell them the right way and give them a direct call to action, don't just put it out there and hope, that will work for you much, much better than just saying, hey, we're struggling, anything you could give would help.
And to add to that point, I think that's really the right way to go, regardless of what, unfortunate situation we're in right now with this COVID-19 outbreak. In general, if you're reaching out to people and requesting that they help support your organization or support your cause or donate or provide some kind of support or resources, putting that in a story and providing like an item of value just from a, really a tangible item to provide a story that people are going to learn from, and sort of wrap your story and wrap your demand for what you're looking for, in that story is a better way to go than just, to your point, simply asking for money or going a more direct path, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of the situation that we're in right now as a society, that's the way to go.
I want to, who is the question asker? Do you have a name?
That was Margaret Palmert.
Margaret. Okay, Margaret. So in the second point of how storytelling can show us the way forward and give us a roadmap, we're going to come back to an exercise you can do to try to find your way out of that. But I understand, I empathize. You're in a tough spot, and a lot of people are. But back to, let's take my friend, the massage therapist. Instead of her just saying times are tough, asking for help is hard, anything you could give would help. If she got on there and was just open and vulnerable and told the story of what she's experiencing, the donations would be a lot different, right? People latch on to that story and they're going to latch on to you. So the more you can be open and honest about your mission and what you're going through, even if it's tough, because it's tough, right? To open up and tell people your vulnerabilities, that's not easy. But if you can do that, that's what's going to connect with people, because they're going to recognize that in themselves. They're also going through this. And if they have $20 or $2,000 to spare, that's the kind of thing that's going to motivate them to donate, not, hey, can you help us, right?
All right, another question from the Mission Bay Aquatic Center. Do you have any recommendations for telling stories in the short attention span era? This is a good one. It seems like anything longer than a couple of minutes or paragraphs gets far less engagement. Thoughts?
Yeah. Definitely. There's a couple things. I'm actually literally writing a book on this right now. And the company that I own is 6-second stories. And so often that is creating actual 6-second stories that we use as social media ads or bumper ads on YouTube. But it's also a figurative concept of how do we maximize our impact in minimal time. Okay. And the way that we do it is by still strong, the storytelling techniques that we use for a 60-minute film, we use for a 6-second social media ad. It's just really condensed and you cut the fat out. Now, we're in this situation where, yes, everybody's attention spans are short. If you've seen any marketing presentation, so many people give the stat about how human attention spans are shorter than a goldfish's at 9 seconds, and ours is 8 seconds or something like that. The thing is, with stories, it's been proven that that's not so. If you craft a good story in the structure, now I'll keep coming back to structure, so I'm going to have to get to this, they will stay with you, because the point of a story and how it's laid out is for one thing to lead to the next thing as efficiently as possible. There is no fat. Each piece of the story, each act and each scene is absolutely necessary and leads, it keeps the story moving forward. After we finish this scene, it leads right into the problem that has arisen in the next scene. Jerry Seinfeld talks about this a lot. It's very similar to writing a joke. Okay. And he said something along the lines of, if you write a joke, you need to whittle it down and lose all the fat until you're at a point where if you lost one more word, the whole joke wouldn't work. Okay. Does that make sense? I mean, that's all the way down to the bone, but without chipping away at the bone. If you lose something and then it doesn't make sense anymore, that is vital. It's essential. It needs to go back in there. But if you lose something and it still flows and it still is impactful and effective, then you didn't need it in the first place. So back to directly answering that question, how short should they be? One, you may have a platform that dictates that. If it's on an Instagram post, 60 seconds is about as long as that video can be. Twitter is 2 minutes and 20 seconds, I believe, for some arbitrary or reason that I'm not unaware of. Facebook is longer. YouTube is even longer. So definitely wherever the platform you're intending on posting, you have to consider those criteria, those parameters. And you want to be as short and efficient as possible. But if you do it in the right way, if you tell a story in the right way, people will follow you. You can test this out on captions or descriptions on your Instagram post. You can write a sentence or you can write a long story, but if you do it in a story, they will follow you. If you're just rambling and putting bullet points in there, you'll lose their attention quickly. So to sum that up, as quickly as you can without losing the point and the message and the impact of the story. Okay. But if you lay it out in the right way, they'll stick with you. They'll stick with you. If you're giving them bullet points and data, they're gone after the second one. Always.
From a delivery standpoint, we live in a world of a shorter attention span, as we talked about, and people are consuming information, stories, news, whatever it may be, through different formats. Social media, I mean, we all know that now. It's been going on for quite some time. I do feel like people need to adjust how they're thinking about actually storytelling and what that actually looks like, because some people believe that we haven't told a story unless you've got 2,000 words, and it's going to take me, a while to read that. You can really tell a short story effectively using various different forms of mediums, whether that is written, but also video. People are listening, people are watching, and they have these social media channels at their fingertips that maybe they're not leveraging as much as they could. What are some ways that people can integrate into these channels that perhaps they haven't used yet, and to tell those stories in a way that's digestible by their audience?
So to your point about a story should be like this long or needs to be this long, it really doesn't. All a story comes down to is overcoming a problem, overcoming an obstacle, and change that is required to do that. Okay. So I'll give you a really quick breakdown of story structure, and we can just take, there's some people that say there's 7 steps or stages, and some people say 5. Let's just take a very simple 3-act structure. Okay. The simplest as we can. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in the beginning, we're at some status quo, just normal life. That's like once upon a time there was blank, right? And then there's a problem that happens. So if we're in this situation, once upon a time there was a local or regional sailing membership or sailing organization. And then all of a sudden, boom, a problem hits. A global pandemic hits, sidelining everybody from doing any kind of recreational activities or group activities for the next, indefinite amount of time. Okay. That's a major problem. That's the problem that we're trying to navigate currently. Well, the problem could be that, membership and donations stopped. I mean, the problem is whatever it is. The problem is what drives that story forward. That's what's going to get people to latch on to your story. And then really, the longer your story, you have a lot of rising action and it's up and down like a roller coaster. And then we work up to the highest point of tension, which is called the climax. And then there's the resolution. Well, what happens at that climax, this is pivotal for you to understand in a short version, is there is a change that happens. There's a change that happens in the person to make them able to overcome that obstacle. Okay. So for me, when I was thinking of how I create content moving forward, that change, it was subtle. These don't have to be as drastic as slaying a monster, right? That change was when the epiphany happened. And I realized that storytelling was how we connect and is more important now. And then after that climax and I defeated that problem, then it sets you off on a new status quo. And now I understand that storytelling more than ever is how we can navigate this. And so my content is directed towards that. So everything is an opportunity to tell a story. When you're with someone in person or on a Zoom meeting or in an Instagram post or in an email newsletter or a Facebook or YouTube video, all of these things are different places and opportunities to tell a story. They're just different versions. Think about it like concentric circles or the Russian doll, right? You have the bigger version. Let's say you have a 20-minute or 10-minute video on YouTube. You can convey that same type of message in a 30-second or Instagram video or just a picture and the description. It always comes down to the same bullet point. So you start with a status quo, once upon a time, and then there's a problem that happens to that character that launches the story forward. There's some back and forth and some, you try this and it doesn't work. You try this and it doesn't work. You try that and it doesn't work. And then finally something happens within you. You see the light. Maybe you had a guide that helped you, a mentor or somebody, a service that came along or a product that you bought or an organization that popped up or something like that. And that provided you with an opportunity to make a change and then overcome that obstacle. I'll give you another example. My brother's a caterer. All his business, almost 80 to 90% of it were weddings. They all got canceled. And so he didn't know what to do. Do I lay my people off? So they can collect unemployment? What do I do to try to keep them on? Do I take the hit so that I can keep paying people, his employees? And then he tried this, it didn't work, tried that, it didn't work. And then there was a local organization that was created called Carborough United that gave people the opportunity to order family dinners from local restaurants and caterers. And that changed his business right there. And now he's cooking more meals per week than he was when he was doing these weddings. He's doing 500 meals a week instead of like a wedding for maybe 200 people. And so that opportunity allowed him to see a way he could pivot and make a change into this new status quo. So think about those steps, and I can send some material to help us, some slides or some images to help us understand the different points, almost like a template, just a roadmap that you can fill in to build out your stories. And then when you're having to condense your stories, you just take the most vital points of those. Instead of having 10 steps or scenes, you whittle it down to the 2 that are most important, because at the end of the day, stories about cause and effect are before and after. This is where I was before and there was a problem. This is the change I made. And then this is where I am now, before and after.
A little bit about the smaller sailing organizations. We've got yacht clubs, we've got sailing organizations, sailing schools, community sailing centers of all different sizes, scope of membership, location, and they all have their different challenges. How do these smaller organizations use storytelling to elevate what they do on a regular basis and raise the profile of the service that they offer their community?
It's a great question. Well, the one good thing about being small is that you're nimble, right? You're quick, you're agile, right? You can do things that a bigger organization can't do because there's a lot of red tape, a lot of, hoops to jump through, and they move like a big boat, right? Like just they can't turn on a dime like that. So for a smaller organization, I think one, you got to just be consistent. Choose where you're going to be, know where your people are, and be consistent in putting out your content and telling your stories. Don't try it for a week and then give up, right? It's always about the long term. So let me just say that first and foremost. But by being small and agile, you can try new things with less risk than some of your bigger organizations. So if something pops up where I don't encourage people to put their content on every platform possible, because you're just going to spread yourself thin. But if you're a smaller organization and you've been hearing about TikTok for the past, 6 months or whatever, well, for a big organization to try to put their stuff on there and do it effectively, it's going to be a whole thing that has to happen, a whole, executive committee decision making and populating the channel, creating the content. If you're smaller and more nimble, more agile, you can try something like that out and see if it's hitting a week without investing too much, 2 weeks, and seeing if it's working, and then pivot. So I think if you're smaller and you're trying to raise that profile, there are no tips and tricks that are going to take you from 100, members or 100 followers, if whichever way you want to look at it, to 1,000 and 10,000, except consistency. I just want to say that. And then there are best practices to follow, but I don't like to encourage those, because every program, every organization, every company is different, and there are nuances that best practices neglect and overlook. They don't know who you serve and how you do it. They don't know the nature of your business. So they're good for a little bit of guidance, but there's no one shoe fits all that's going to say that, like, here's how you climb your content. Consistency in putting it out there, and being creative about what's a new way that we can do that. And again, you have to put the focus on your audience. Where is your audience? If you're serving the youth, I have a story coaching client that is a roller skating rink owner. Well, who do you think her target demo is? They're 13-year-olds, right? So for her not to be on Snapchat and TikTok, that's a major missed opportunity. If your audience is 65, that's probably not your platform. Okay. So really think about who you serve and where they will be. But the advantage that I see for a smaller organization is the things that you can be able to do. I don't want to digress too much, but up here in my office, you can't see it. There's a picture of Mike Tyson, who I look up to as a boxer. The rest of his life was a roller coaster ride as well. But there's a point that he said, because he was like 5'9", 5'10", fighting heavyweights that were 6'5", 6'6". And he always thought that he would never be effective when he was a kid, because his jab, he couldn't get in there when you have these really long, reach opponents, until he started learning how to throw from different angles and utilize his jab in a different way and play to his strengths. So my point is, don't look at your size as a weakness. See what opportunities it provides you being a smaller organization. You can't compare yourself to the huge organizations, but what can you do differently that they can't? That's what you need to focus on. Don't try to compete with them where they are. Take a right and drive your lane.
You talked about consistency, which was great and a really good point. What about frequency? Because we see this, across the board throughout industries, and everybody's about more. And so consistency is important. Frequency is important, but about that volume can be too much sometimes. And whether that's you're delivering your stories via email or social media, how do you balance, what is too much, and sort of knowing your role in the place of that community, and not over pushing out content, stories,
Yes.
things like that?
Great question. So it's a little bit of trial and error. You'll see what tends to work best. But what we're seeking to accomplish here is depth, okay? Not breadth, right? We're seeking to go deeper with the people that we serve. And that's what good stories are about, right? So consistency is much more important than frequency, okay? frequency is not bad, and it can be very effective. I also worked with this new fitness league back in 2017 in New York, and we brought in a social media manager that worked with top musicians. And he was like, look, we're posting 5 times a day. Now, this was a fitness, sports league. So there was really great content. I mean, each picture they put out looked amazing because these athletes were doing these amazing moves. So visually, it worked for that platform. The sailing community also will give you great visuals, I would imagine. So I've seen it work. We're pumping out, consistency for a platform like that with imagery like that worked, or frequency rather. I said consistency. But then, then it petered out. It petered out as the as the money petered out in that organization, and as the efforts petered out with the people who were driving that train. So what ended up happening was it burned them out. It was too much. Now they rose really quickly in 3 months, but now here we are 3 years later. Does that organization exist? It doesn't. And I'm not saying everybody would end up that way, but I am saying that you can easily burn yourself out by overcommitting yourself. It is way worse for you to say, hey, audience, you're going to be hearing from me 5 times a week, and then do it for a month. And then the next month they hear from you twice a week, and then once a week, and then never again. Then the alternative of like, hey guys, once a month, I'm going to send you an in-depth email that tells you, that is about servicing you and not just talking about our organization and what cool things we did this month, but serving you and the things that you need and the problems that you are dealing with. And by you, I mean your audience, our audiences. Every month, I'm going to send you an in-depth email that listens to your problems. We've been listening to you for the past month, and list out ways you can defeat and overcome those problems in this email. And you do that once a month, 12 times a year for 5 years. That's how you're going to see it grow. So frequency is not a bad thing, but you need to do something that's manageable for you, because it's so much more about the long term. So for me, I was able to commit to doing 1 weekly email storytelling tip to my subscribers. Okay. If I try to do that 3 times a week, it would kill me. And I would do it for a little while when I had them banked up, and then I wouldn't. So it's a great question. I think that always in anything that we do, when we're trying to make progress forward, consistency is the key. If you're trying to lose weight, you can't work out for a week, 3 hours each day, and then it happened. But you can work out every day and eat right 20 minutes, 30 minutes for a year, and be able to sustain that. If you want to save money, it's the same thing. If I try to put a chunk in every time I have extra money, how much do you think I've saved at the end of the year? If I put away $10 every week, you can do that math and you can see how it builds after that. So make the pace that you can achieve, focusing on depth for your audience and the value you're providing your audience that you can consistently keep up with.
One thing that sailing has a challenge with, U.S. sailing, as well as yacht clubs, other sailing organizations and schools, is it's a real challenge to get outside your audience. We can tell stories to our own audience, but getting buy-in either from other outlets or just from individuals following us on social media channels, what are some other ways that these clubs, these organizations, these sailing schools can tell stories that'll relate to an audience outside of sailing? And sometimes that seems to be a challenge to relate to, whether it's other athletes or just anybody.
Yes. Wonderful question. And I'm excited to address it. So when we talk about stories, and I mentioned this at the keynote back at the Sailing Leadership Forum in February, and we've already talked about this today, there is the external driving factor, which is the problem that the hero or the character is dealing with. And then there's always the internal factor. What is their internal goal? So for an example, any movie that you watch, like, okay, let's take Rocky. A lot of people have seen Rocky. Well, the goal was to win, to defeat the heavyweight champion of the world. Okay. But internally, what he was struggling with is that he was a bum that was fighting these like no-name fighters every day of the week for like $40. And he thought you know, in the back of his head, he always thought that he had what it would take to be a real contender. He just never had the shot. And so he was presented with this opportunity and he didn't win. He didn't win the goal. He didn't defeat, you know, Apollo Creed. But at the end of the movie, he went the distance with the champion. So that told him that, hey, I do have the goods. I am a real contender. And then, of course, if you followed the franchise, there's like 100 of those movies now, and he went on to be the champ. But the point was why the first one was so good and won Oscars was because he still achieved what he needed to achieve, this emotional need, right? There's a physical need, a goal, and then there's an emotional need, which is like what's really going on. I also talk about a lot of my keynotes. There's an old marketing guru from the 60s, Ted Levitt, and he wrote this piece for the Harvard Business Review called Marketing Myopia. And he talked about drill bits. He was like, nobody needs a 1/4-inch drill bit. What they need is a 1/4-inch hole, right? And the current marketing guru, Seth Godin, took that a little further and it's like, well, you don't really need a hole. What is it? Who wants a 1/4-inch hole? What you need is a place to put an expansion bolt so that you can hang a shelf. That's what you need. And you can peel that back a little bit more. You don't really just need a shelf for no reason. What you need is a place to put your books. Peel it back one more layer. You don't really need a place to put your books because they're on the floor right now. That's a place where they are. What you need is a place to put your books so you can tidy up your home office. You peel it back one more layer. What you really need is, because it's okay that the books are in the floor of your home office, but what you really need is to clean them up out of the floor of your home office, because it's the first door that people see when they come into your house and there's no curtains so they can look right in here. And your wife doesn't want everybody to think that you're a slob. That's what you really need to clean those books up for, and why you need to get the drill bit to make that hole. Okay. And that's a little bit of a joke there. It's totally not my real situation at all. But the point is, through that exercise, we get to like, well, what's it really about? What are we tapping into? What problem are we really solving? Well, what I really want to do with that drill is I want to clean up my office, but it's because I want to keep a happy home, right? So we often talk about, what it's about and then what it's really about on this underlayer. And at the keynote, I talked about how I came from a powerboat, a motorboat family. And so I didn't know if I'd be able to speak to a room of sailors, like where we would connect. And as I told the stories and worked through the speech, and as I worked through it in my own head, I realized that like sailing's not really about the vessel, right? I even asked the audiences, I was like, what's sailing really about? And the words that came back were family, right? Friends. One person said wind, which got a little laugh. And I was like, say more about that. And he said controlling wind. And I was like, peel a layer back. And then we realized what it's really about when we're talking about the wind is controlling this uncontrollable force, right? That's what that comes down to, like the feeling that you get of being able to harness a natural power like that's a high. So when we do that and we start getting to the themes and the core values and concepts of what our service or our organization is really about, that's what's going to relate to other people. If you watched Rocky, you don't have to be a boxer to appreciate that, because you've felt like an imposter before. You have felt struggle before. You have had a goal before that you didn't think that you were going to be able to achieve. That's why we love movies of people we can't that we're not the same as, because we can identify with them. And that, back to my first point about how storytelling can create communities, that is how you do it. This creates empathy. When you can relate to a character and identify with them, that is how you latch on to that story and you want to root for them to win. So even though we're talking about sailing, it's just the backdrop, okay? That's not what it's really about. There's a couple of other examples. I use this in filmmaking all the time because I have friends who are always like, hey, I had a friend one time, they always love to pitch you ideas about, you should do a show about this. And so I had a friend that said, man, you should do a show about the craft beer industry in North Carolina, because it's the microbrew industry, because it's been skyrocketing. And I'm like, what's the story there? That's not a story. That's a background. That's a setting. That's not a story. So let's take, I don't know, Pawn Stars. You guys familiar with that? Is that show even still on? But Pawn Stars is about pawn shop owners, but if you watched it, it's about family working together. That's what we latch onto. We want to see the father and son go at it, and this model is in every reality show like that, with families working together. And so for the craft beer example, it's like, yeah, if I had a great compelling character to follow that had a real goal that he was struggling with and obstacles he was struggling against, that's what would make me want to watch. And anytime you're pitching a show to a network, it's always about the characters. So when we apply that to sailing, like, well, what is your organization really about? Who does it really serve? Yes, sailors, but in what way and how? Like, what are you tapping into? Right? Is it the technique? Is it being out on open water? Is it, I put a post up today. I had a great testimonial or quote from Paul Callahan from Sail to Prevail, who was really sweet to me and came up after the keynote speech in February. And, his program provides sailing for disabled children. Well, what is he really providing them? Yes, it's sailing. That's what's on the, on the box, right? But it doesn't matter. We don't care what box something comes in. Okay. We care about what's inside. So what is he really providing those children with? I mean, I can answer it, but you all can think of it too. Like, these children probably never thought they could do anything like that. He's providing them with happiness and with belief in themselves that they can do what other people can do. And they've probably been told or felt their whole lives that they can't. I'm getting chills right now thinking about that. Like, that's what they do. That's how they serve people. And that's the kind of stories that they need to tell. It's not about the sailing itself. It's what's underneath.
Another question from Mission Bay Aquatic Center, and you can think about this if you don't have it at the tip of your tongue, but you have an
Ready.
example, and I don't know how we would share this, but maybe you can talk about it, an example of a 6-second video that you can actually tell in 6 seconds. What are some of your 6-second video stories that really stood out to you and made you think, well, you know what, they're onto something. It was 6 seconds, it was powerful, it worked. How do we move forward with that concept?
Yeah. So at that point, if you have 10 to 15 seconds, it's, I won't say easy, but it's easier. And in those 10 or 15 seconds is another ad format that you see a lot of, right? And that's, I think, what Instagram stories is, and other platforms. But in that amount of time, you can actually do some damage, and you can include the 3 parts of the story: the beginning, middle, and then end. When you whittle it down to 6 seconds, you really are forced to do it with 2 of those. And that's the before and the after that I talked about, the changes that happen. This is where I was and the problem that I was facing with. Here's how I overcame it. That's the only way you can do it. And why 6-second stories are used most often as bumper ads, which is like the unskippable ads at the beginning of a YouTube video, is because they're really good at raising curiosity and driving someone to the longer story, right? Whether that's, if it's a 3-minute video and we just see the first 6 seconds of, and there's 2 minutes and 54 seconds behind it, or it just drives them to a place and they can see more. It often works best as a teaser to make them want to see more. So you're not actually telling a full story. You're kind of leaving them wanting to learn more is the most effective way to use that. So for me I can show examples of that I've done, but I would probably have to send them after this. But you can see some of that at 6secondstories.com. There's a section of our work that's like long form documentary, short form ads, which is like 15 to 30 seconds or up to 60 seconds. And then there are 6-second stories as well on there. So you can see some of those. But when you're building them, first of all, think about the point. It might not be good for you to make a 6-second story. What's the purpose? Where are you using it? How are you using it? Who are you serving or trying to speak to with it? But the best, most effective way I see that they are used as a tool to draw someone in and make them want to learn more. It's tough. It's challenging to tell a story in 6 seconds. It's easy to make a joke or show a flashy, graphic, but to pull, what I do is heartfelt stories. You guys can probably tell, like, that's the stuff that I love. And it's hard to get that emotion across in 6 seconds. And so to do it, you have to have an identifiable character that I can understand what that person is going through. When I did one for a girl who went through a program here in North Carolina, it's more than an after school program. It's a program that helps them get to college for underprivileged and typically underrepresented people. And so when she says, I didn't want to just be a product of my environment, in that one quick sentence that took 2 seconds and with the right imagery attached to it, I understood what she meant. I didn't need to know the whole background of what her mom went through and why she was poor and all that. I can see that image and hear that one sentence, and it zips me into understanding. Oh yeah, I get that. And then when she says, then I found this program, and now, I'm graduating, summa cum laude or whatever, I can see the two pieces of the story. So hopefully that helps them.
You were a keynote speaker at our Sailing Leadership Forum in San Diego in February. You had a chance to talk to some of the participants there. What were some of your takeaways and observations following your presentation in terms of some of the challenges or just some of the thoughts that some of the participants came up to you and approached you after that presentation? And you mentioned one story, but anything else stick out to you?
I think, well, I have a couple of things I can address that briefly, but then I want to talk about the situation I think most people are in now and how they can navigate their way out of that. Most
Right.
of what I heard that day, or that weekend rather, was just people understanding like the most effective stories to tell and stories that work the best. And so again, that's identifying a character that I can relate to. So they're struggling with something that I can relate to. It doesn't have to be something I've experienced, but something I've related to. And a lot of people will come back to the consistency thing, which we talked about too. Like most people that I talk to, especially nonprofits, for the earlier question we had, most people just struggle because they're overworked and don't have a lot of support or time or money or resources. And so it's about how do we continue to create good content with feeling like the world is stacked against us. So to me, my advice is to keep it simple. Most of the stories that I do, I raised $6,000 recently for the upholsterer because I just took an iPhone and recorded myself and told a good story. Everything to me comes back to telling a good story. It doesn't matter so much the tools that you have to do it, unless you understand. You can always do more things with more tools, but if you don't understand how to use them in the simplest versions, you're not going to know how to use them in the more complex versions. They're not going to do your job for you. So learn and reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this. Learn the basics of storytelling. I want to say one more thing because I think people are experiencing a lot of trouble right now. The second part that I talked about briefly, storytelling shows us the way. I want you to share stories because it helps us understand, what other people are going through, and we can see how they've overcome obstacles, and it can give us possibly a roadmap of how we can overcome it. So it can show us what to do and what not to do. And if we share good stories, it gives people hope. If we share negative stories, it lets people know that they're not alone. And that's crucial right now. And there's actually a thing called story design. You can actually use storytelling to help get yourself out of a predicament. Story design is the process of using storytelling to think, and it's like design thinking, if you've heard of that term, to think about the potential outcomes of any decisions you make or paths that you take or new directions that you pivot in. You play out the story and see where it can go. Airbnb did this with they called it Project Snow White, because Walt Disney did this when they storyboarded for Snow White back in the 30s. And Airbnb hired Pixar artists to draw potential experiences for their hosts, for their guests, and internally for their hiring process. So what I would encourage you to do is okay, think about what we want to do to pivot, and then use storytelling in a simple structure to think, okay, what are the problems that could arise? How would we address those problems? What are the potential outcomes? And as you build it out and follow it through steps 1 through 10 or 1 through X, you will see things that you don't think about when you're at stage 1 and you're just like, well, what if we did this, Tim? And then you just kind of have to think about it, play it out, and see what could potentially go wrong. What characters could benefit you? What characters would be foes or knock you off? What could knock you off that path? So thinking about how to use storytelling internally is also really valuable during this time. How can we pivot? What ways can we go? Use other people's examples, and then use potential examples of how you might do it internally.
Great stuff, Rain. Some closing thoughts as we wrap up here. We're an hour in. It's been outstanding. A lot of good material here, a lot of good resources. Some of your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who attended. I hope that we provided some value and helped you. If you haven't noticed, I'm very passionate about this. I love this and storytelling and how it works and why it works. So I'm happy to talk about it at any time. One, I have two offers, two gives, and then I'll have one ask. The first give that I have an offer is every Monday I put out a storytelling tip, weekly storytelling tips, and you can get that, and I can send you the link if you want to, Jake. rainbennett.com/weekly storytelling tips. It's just a short, simple email that says, here's a little tip, here's how I apply it, and usually I give examples, and then a little exercise or two that you can do to utilize that. And then secondly, since this has all happened, I also do one-on-one story coaching for different clients, and I started offering those calls for free. It's just a 1 hour like this, like a Zoom call. So if you're interested in talking more in depth, I'm happy to extend that offer for free to you all to just hop on the call and let's talk about it, because we talked earlier about your nuances for your organization. I need to know those to help you craft the best story for you and the audience you serve. Again, like I said, with the best practices, I can tell you all the structure of stories, but each one of us is going to have a different story to tell. Even if we told a story about the same thing, we're all unique and our perspectives and points of view are unique. So each of those stories would be different. So the more I can know about what you do, the more I can help you with that. And my ask is simply this. Jake just asked me any final thoughts. My ask is for you to just practice this. Practice being open and honest and vulnerable and learning simple storytelling techniques. There's a lot of content out there. I have a lot of content. There's free content. There's blogs, there's articles, there's Instagram posts, there's YouTube videos, and there's my podcast, The Storytelling Lab. Check out any of that sort of stuff, or just send me an email and I'm happy to give you some templates to lay out that structure, but you just have to practice. The biggest problem that people face that I see is that they don't take action. Be bold enough and courageous enough to just start, and the rest is a lot easier after that.
Great stuff, Rain. Well, again, thanks for this. This was a great hour that you spent here live with us on the Starboard Portal. We appreciated your keynote at the Sailing Leadership Forum. This is reinforcing that in the new world that we live in right now. And I think you did a great job sort of customizing this and adjusting that to the situation that we're in right now. And its storytelling is perhaps more important now than ever before. And it's a way for us to stay connected and stay engaged. So I really appreciate you being on here today.
Absolutely. Storytelling is, and community is. At this time, more than ever, community. And for me, for what it's worth, storytelling is absolutely the best way that I've found to establish, maintain, and strengthen communities.
So folks, if you enjoyed today's session or any of the other sessions we have put on, please support our efforts to build a community of active and engaged sailors through the Starboard Portal by purchasing or renewing a U.S. Sailing membership. We have a lot of great content coming up on the schedule, and thanks to U.S. Sailing members, we're able to adapt and evolve to better serve sailors with content like this. So visit us at mem.ussailing.org. That's mem.ussailing.org to join or renew your U.S. Sailing membership today. And remember, next week on Monday, May 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Ed Cesari will present live on the world's great 600 milers, a bucket list tour. And you can catch this presentation with Rain Bennett and others that are archived on the Starboard Portal website at ussailing.org. You can catch all these live sessions, contributor content, other U.S. Sailing original content. It's all there for you. Check it out. Spend some time on it over the weekend. There's some really good stuff, as well as Rain Bennett's presentation here on a Friday. So for Rain Bennett, Jake Fish, so long from the Starboard Portal. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.